And all right, take it away, Edward and Angus.
Okay, let me get my screen shared here for a second. Hold on. Okay, everybody can see that?
Looks
All
good.
right. Okay, so hello. My name is Edward Escobar, and I'm a content English teacher in the course of International Cultural Studies at Kyoto Nishi High School here in Kyoto, Japan. I'm here with Angus McGregor, who will introduce himself later in this presentation. I first want to thank the Kyoto JALT officers, especially Shalana and White, who I've been in contact with throughout the preparation of this presentation, for allowing us to talk today as part of your monthly Community Spotlight series. I also want to acknowledge that the inspiration for putting this presentation together came from listening to Dr. Sako's keynote last November on how Kyoto Seika University is working through this current pandemic. It seems invaluable that we share experiences, whether it's from the classroom or from a conference, so that we can work to put the best possible product together for our students in what many are dubbing the new normal. Before we go into specifics, a little bit about myself, and I apologize for my Indiana Jones villain look there. But I've been working in Japan as an English teacher in one form or another since 2005. I hold a master's of science in education with a focus on TESOL, and I've been working at Kyoto Nishi High School as a content English teacher since 2013. I have also been part of the Kansai High School Model United Nations Organizing Committee since 2013, and focusing mostly on how to effectively digitize aspects of the MUN process without changing the process itself. I'm on the high school's ICT committee, advising and promoting IT use in the class and in curricula, as well as working with teachers through this pandemic on remote learning processes. I'm also an Apple Distinguished Educator and a Level 2 Google Certified Educator. So today, we'll be discussing a few of the challenges that we, the organizing committee of the Kansai High School Model United Nations, encountered when we ultimately decided to take our annual MUN conference online with over 200 participants from various high schools. More specifically, how the number of participants in the asynchronous aspect of this online project may have impacted the participation of those participating, as well as a few other points of interest we think are important for an event such as this. Before we begin, I just want to give a little prologue of the activity we are focusing around. As the title notes, we'll be talking about Model United Nations. And for those who are not familiar with what that is, it is a simulation of conferences and committees that take place in United Nations, usually in and around the General Assembly, which encompasses all 193 states recognized by the UN, with the goal of formulating resolutions that outline current problems and solutions the world is facing. It's an activity that fosters creative, logical, and critical thinking as we encourage collaboration and cooperation among participants. It's an activity that's been popular in university circles for over 90 years. And before the UN, it was called the League of Nations. So the simulation was called the Model Assembly of the League of Nations. And this has been increasing in high school presence, mainly in the United States, for the last 50 years, though it's been taken off gradually in Japan in the last 30 years or so. One plausible reason why it's increased in high school is its relation to project-based learning. As was published in The Language Teacher, March of last year, and elsewhere for that matter, project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. And when you look at the process of project-based learning, a Model United Nations very much fits the bill. Identifying problems we face in the world, constructing questions for the purpose of identifying solutions, consulting, researching, drafting a resolution that outlines the solutions, and presenting it through participation in a simulation of the General Assembly. So you can imagine how disturbing it was, not only for the organizers, but also for the students who spent months preparing, as Angus will explain later, to learn that this project may be altered or watered down, or in the worst case, canceled as a result of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. So before going into the details of our decision and what we did, I want to first note what has been happening to other high school MUNs around the Kansai region last year. The Japan English MUN high schools, that is organized by Kindai University and that is part of a larger university MUN there, and was also scheduled around the same time as ours, about mid-June, was canceled. And the MUN Osaka, hosted by Kansai International High School in July, became an internal only event. Just the alteration or cancellation of these two events due to the ongoing pandemic affected hundreds of would-be participants from outside high schools. Kyoto Otani High School, I believe, was also looking to get their own MUN started last year, but opted for an internal event as well. The Ritsumeikan Uji High School MUN was able to be held online, which occurred just this past December, a few months after our own event concluded. So what about ours, the Kansai High School Model United Nations? Well, we felt with our event in June normally, and without any guide on how to or an example to duplicate from other MUN events, that it was in the best interest of all participants that we do what we can to host the Kansai High School Model United Nations as an online event to the best of our ability, while still maintaining the format of an English L2 centric project. And this didn't come without its challenges, which is what we want to discuss today. Again, because we feel it's in the best interest of all educators to learn of others' experiences so as to make the best decisions for their online presence. So there are three parts I want to discuss in this presentation today. First, I want to briefly paint the picture of what exactly we do in terms of the MUN process, a bit of a rundown on what we normally do, how it has evolved over the years, and so on. The Kansai High School Model United Nations actually celebrated its 30th year last year. And with this pandemic going on, what a year to celebrate, right? So I have asked the director of the Kansai High School Model United Nations, Angus McGregor, to paint the picture for us for the benefit of understanding the impact the pandemic had on this event last year. After that, I will discuss the challenges we faced both leading up to the MUN as well as during the MUN, again, focusing mostly on the asynchronous participation that may have been affected by group size. And finally, wrapping it all up with a reflection on what we learned and how we plan to use our newfound knowledge for not only this year's conference, but also as something to keep in mind for any online projects or classes we manage in the future. And I hope others viewing can as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce Angus McGregor, Director of the Kansai High School Model United Nations. And I'm going to do a screen swap here, so hold on a second.
Angus, you're still muted.
Sorry about that, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Edward, and thank you to all of you who have gathered today on this Saturday to listen to some of the particulars about a project that is very important, not only to Edward and myself, but the whole staff and teaching faculty at Kyoto Gaidai High School. A little bit about myself. Angus McGregor, and I have a master's in applied arts and sciences and global studies from the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And I've been teaching at Kyoto Gaidai High School since 1993, so going on my 28th year now. I'm currently the director of the Kansai High School Model United Nations. I assumed that position in the year 2000. However, I have attended all 30 of the Kansai High School Model United Nations. I've attended the first 3 as an observer, and also brought students from another high school where I was working. I'm involved in the community in the Kyoto UNESCO Association, the Japan University English Model United Nations, as well as a TEDx Kyoto organizer and curation team member. So what I would like to do before Edward gets into some of the specifics of what we learned and the data that we collected is introduce the course of International Cultural Studies at Kyoto Gaidai High School. We call it the IC course. and the Kansai High School Model United Nations, which you will see referred to as the KHSMUN. The course of International and Cultural Studies at Kyoto Gaidanishi High School was founded in 1988. At that time, the school was called Kyoto Nishi High School, but it has always been affiliated with Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. The high school was founded in 1957, and it was an all-boys school. And in the late 80s, there was this effort to make the school co-ed, but also to create a course that would feed Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. And so Lori Zinnick Nishide, who many of you may know, was teaching at the high school at that time and tasked with the project of creating an English immersion course that would feed Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. Lori went on to where she is now, where she's a professor in the graduate school at Kobe City University of Foreign Studies in their education department. So the IC was born as a 4 skills content-based partial immersion EFL course within a Japanese high school. We are a course that focuses on global studies, cultural understanding, and developing active and engaged students. We currently have 2 tracks, an A class and a B class. The A class was the original class formed, and that was to feed Kyoto University of Foreign Studies with its internal recommendation system. The B class came a few years later to fill a need that was in the Kyoto community for students who wanted more English, but they wanted to pursue their Jukan studies so that they could attend or try to attend other programs at other universities. We currently have 9 native English-speaking teachers. They're all full-time. They serve on various school committees. They're homeroom teachers. They chaperone students overseas and are fully integrated into the KGN community. Our teachers come from the Bahamas, Canada, Jamaica, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and the United States. Now, while the course puts a premium on English education, most of our students typically come from Japanese public junior high schools, and they show an aptitude and a strong interest in their English studies. This is not a returnee program, so to speak. We do have a few bicultural students and returnee students who join us every year, but the large population of students who come into the IC course, they have earned maybe only grade 3 on the ACAN test, and they come from public junior high schools. Our curriculum is somewhat unique. Even in 1988, it was project-based and active learning focused, with about 6 to 11 hours a week, depending on the A track or the B track, with native English-speaking teachers. And I think for those who have worked in Japanese high schools, this is quite a large part of their curriculum that is devoted to their English studies with native English-speaking teachers. 6 to 12-week thematic units, so the reading, writing, listening, speaking classes all revolve around a theme that is decided, organized, and taught by a group of teachers, anywhere from 2 to 3 working with a homeroom class. Some of these themes do relate as closely as possible to some of the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that the United Nations created in 2015. A list of those, which is there on your screen. We also have a required short-term study abroad program with an option to extend long-term. Short-term is 5 to 7 weeks. Long-term is 6 months to 10 months. Our ICA class goes to the Vancouver, Canada region for about 7 weeks, and our ICB class goes to the Auckland, New Zealand area, where they join regular high school students in New Zealand and Canada in their normal studies. Today, we're going to talk about this project that has become an important part of our curriculum, the Kansai High School Model United Nations, which was founded in 1991. It was the capstone project for our first graduating class, the 3rd-year students. And it involved, in 1991, 2 high schools, Kyoto Nishi High School at that time, and Kansai International High School, which is now in Tennoji, but at that time it was located in Toyonaka. And it was held for 2 days on the campus of Kyoto University of Foreign Studies with 52 students. The conference has gone on to become a multi-3-day English event at the Kyoto International Conference Center. And in 2019, we had 12 high schools and over 250 students participating. And then last year in 2020, due to the COVID pandemic, it was moved online with 11 high schools and also over 250 students. A model United Nations revolves around an agenda that is currently being discussed at the United Nations or has recently been discussed at the United Nations. So there's a list on the screen. Our agendas have focused on the environment, refugees, child labor, child soldiers. Last year, we did the social impact of waste with two subtopics, plastic waste and food waste. And once again, this is an all English conference. This is not a presentation on how to teach or how to organize a model United Nations. We'd be happy to come back and do that if we were invited. But there is a little bit of jargon, MUN jargon, that terms that Edward and I thought that would be important for you to be familiar with in order to really understand what we're talking about. You'll hear these terms come up in our presentation. Model United Nations are focused on a draft resolution. And a draft resolution is a working paper that reflects problems and solutions that are being debated in the General Assembly. The draft resolution is split into two parts, a preambulatory part and the operative part. The preambulatory clauses are at the top half of the resolution, and the operative clauses come at the bottom half. The preambulatory clauses give the history and explain some of the past events related to the problem. Operative clauses, which are written by students, outline the solutions and the effects that they are proposing to address that current issue. A block is a large committee of delegates. Each General Assembly will have about 100 students, and then we will have 3 blocks in that General Assembly with about 33 to 35 students per block. And then within those blocks, we have multiple committees that will be made up of 4 to 5 students that are working on specific aspects of a resolution that they are writing. And I'm going to explain that from now. 1991 to 1999, the event was held at Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, 2 high schools. It was largely a formalized event. Some of you may enjoy some of these pictures. You can see some of the jidai and what the students are wearing. Students would sit at their desk. Each country could put forth a resolution. The resolution would be, they'd give speeches on those resolutions, and then delegates could speak from their desk and ask questions, give answers, make comments, and then they would vote on these resolutions. And that would happen with a variety of resolutions that individual countries proposed. The event in the year 2000, we were able to expand and move up to the Kyoto International Conference Center in the northern part of Kyoto near Takaragaike. And as you can see, and as you can imagine, we were able to use these large, beautiful conference rooms. We were able to divide our General Assembly into 2 large sessions, as we had almost 250 students. So 125 students in each session. And we were using rooms that the United Nations has used in the past when it's run conferences here in Kyoto. Because of the architecture and having the space and the room to spread out, we introduced the idea of blocks, which I just mentioned a few minutes earlier, where we could take a GA assembly of 125 students and divide them into 3 blocks, which anywhere from 30 to 35 students per block. Each block was assigned a draft resolution, and then student leaders who ran the meetings would take that topic, that draft resolution. For example, if this one was talking about refugees, they would create subheadings for that draft resolution: human trafficking, border control, information safety, things like that. And then they would split it into smaller committees. And these committees would go to work, working to produce clauses that dealt with their assigned topics, to eventually write a 15-clause draft resolution that they would present to the General Assembly in day 2. Day 2 begins in the morning with poster presentations, and this is run very similar to academic conferences that many of you are familiar with. Delegates are given the chance to present about their country. in a poster presentation. Other delegates circulate around the room, interacting with students in English. They're learning about the countries that various student delegates are representing, how the agenda topic that year relates to their country, and some proposals that they hope to make to solve the issues through the draft resolution. It's a very interactive and engaging activity that serves not only as an information gathering session, but also as an icebreaker for the large General Assembly debates that happen later on that afternoon and in day 3. The remaining 3 sessions are the General Assembly sessions. And we have 3 of those. Each session is 3 hours long. And in each session, each block is given one General Assembly session of 3 hours to present their draft resolution. They give speeches on the draft resolution. Student leaders facilitate the meeting. There's informal debate, that bottom right picture where there's microphones and students are allowed to ask questions about draft resolution being presented. And then there are also informal unmoderated caucuses where students can actually stand up, walk around the room, and interact with students in a more casual manner to ask direct questions about certain things in the draft resolution. That draft resolution is amended, changes are made, and then those amendments are voted on, and then the draft resolution is voted on by all participants. So one goal over the last 30 years that we as a staff in the IC course have had with the Kansai High School Model United Nations is to increase meaningful student interaction and output. So what started as one GA meeting back in 1991 evolved into 2 GA meetings where we could accommodate the growing interest in the conference. We then were able to introduce blocks, which got our interaction numbers even to a smaller cohort for students to engage with each other. Within those blocks, we even broke it down even smaller to block committees. And then 3 years ago, we introduced the idea of poster presentations for students to engage even on a more personal level with each other. Many teachers have come through our course and have contributed their knowledge and to our curriculum, but also to ways to make the Model United Nations a more meaningful event for the participants. And this is a little bit of an example of how we have adapted and incorporated a lot of these ideas over the last 30 years. The result, an excellent student-focused active learning conference for over 250 students, 12 high schools from around Kansai region, plus Okayama. And I'd like to point out something here that this is a big deal. It's a big deal not only for the teachers who work with the students and teaching the students to get ready for this project, but also for the students themselves who prepare for months to participate. Actual diplomats are invited to come and observe. We've had United Nations staff from Japan come and observe this event. The media is invited. Parents come and observe. They bring, grandparents are allowed to watch. High schools bring junior classes. They bus them up from Okayama, from Osaka, Nara, and around Kyoto to come see the seniors in action. And in fact, we had one teacher from our high school, the baseball coach, came up and he said, wow, this is like Koshien for English programs, referring to the Koshien High School baseball tournament. And it really is a big deal. It takes a lot of work. And at this moment, I'd like to give a shout out to our 2020 organizing committee, Quentin Durning, Tiffany Smith, Stephen Coates, Kazunori Kuboy, and all the other members of our IC staff who helped to make 2020 possible. COVID-19 happened. We did not want to cancel. We wanted to continue this event, and how to do that is something that Edward is going to talk about from now. So I will give the screen back to Edward.
Okay, so let's take a look at our planning process, decisions we made, and the impact these decisions had on our MUN conference. In April and May of last year, we, Kyoto Prefecture, and much of the rest of Japan were in a state of emergency. And by that time, schools had already decided to engage in remote learning. This put our school administration in a tight spot, as we literally had no IT infrastructure that could support any kind of online learning. So finally in May, students were issued school administered email addresses so that we could take advantage of our parent university's Google for Education license and Google Classroom. Despite this, the concept of online learning never matured at our school until after the state of emergency was lifted. From then, our school took measures to gradually bring students back into the classroom, but with restrictions, of course. Despite the return, no activities involving a congregation of students were allowed. So we had to come up with a plan to keep the MUN alive. I was actually asked back in April to start thinking up ideas of an online version of this conference, and many variations were discussed. Even as the conference opened and participation began, we were still putting it together, sort of like laying the railroad tracks while the train was in motion. And our own school schedule changing almost weekly in response to pandemic-related announcements from various government entities didn't help either. So this is what we ended up doing. As Angus explained, this conference is normally a 3-day event with what we call block meetings, 3 General Assembly sessions, and a poster session scheduled. To accommodate an online format, we reduced the number of General Assembly sessions from 3 to 2 and stretched the 3 days to 7 weeks, with the first 2 weeks focused on block meetings and the last 4 weeks focused on General Assembly proceedings. We did this to accommodate a linear schedule with each task stretched a week to allow what we thought would be as many participants to contribute to the tasks as possible. What I'll show later on is that these week-long windows of opportunity were actually unnecessary. To briefly review some of the jargon here, when I mention General Assembly and blocks, this is what I'm referring to in terms of participant size. Usually we have a General Assembly of 100 participants broken up into blocks of roughly 30 to 50 participants. Last year, we decided to only go with 2 blocks instead of the 3 that Angus mentioned. So the blocks are actually a little bit bigger, about 50 participants each. During block meetings, as was mentioned, blocks tend to break up into smaller committees to work on different aspects of a draft resolution. What I want to focus on are General Assembly participants, which includes everyone and block participants. So going back to our planning process, to make this all work, we relied on a number of applications within Google Workspace, or what was formerly known as G Suite for Education. We took advantage of most apps within the workspace with crucial support from our school administration and facilities department. And we could not have put any of this together without our school's administration help. They ended up becoming the liaison between us and our parent university, Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, which ended up giving us the availability to use some of these resources. And there seems to be a practice fire alarm going on right now. Sorry. Okay. So just to give you a quick rundown of some of the apps that we used. Google Docs, which is this blue icon here, was used to support the creation and editing of each block's draft resolution, allowing delegates to contribute simultaneously through either editing or commenting. Google Forms, which is the purple icon here, was used as a submission tool for operative clauses or the solutions delegates put together for the rest of their blocks to discuss. Google Spreadsheets, which is the green icon here, was used more as a database to collect information submitted through forms, which is still an important tool as it made going through the submitted data quite easy. And of course, Google Drive, the triangle icon here, to store all these files in. This process also included the use of Google Groups, that's the top icon right here on the top right, to allow blocks to communicate with each other either by email or an online message board. Google Calendar, the square icon here with the 3-1, was also crucial in creating the meet rooms that delegates use for our live synchronous meetings. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with these tools, but it's important to emphasize the power that this suite entails, not only for classrooms, but for conferences and other gatherings as well. Aside from Google applications, we also took advantage of an application called Flipgrid, which is administered by Microsoft, which I think most educators are familiar with now, but I will go into a little bit about how we were trying to use it later. But first, I want to champion the usefulness of Google Sites. Google Sites is Google's web page builder and can be hosted within Google's Drive Cloud. We have actually been using Google Sites since 2013 for the purpose of keeping the blueprint of each Blockstref resolution. But 2020 was the first time we used it more as a bulletin board system for schedule reminders and instructions for each of the week's tasks. The screenshot you see was before a live meeting session, showing both a main Google Meet room, which you see right here where it says room 1 in blue, and a number of breakout rooms in gray from 2 on. You can see that under each breakout room is a link to a document. And these documents were used by the smaller block committees to collaborate their ideas during the Google Meet session. Now, our school has what is called a Google for Education license, which is different from a Google Enterprise for Education license. So breakout rooms are not available to us this year with Google Meet, but they weren't available to anyone last year. But how we were able to create large number of rooms through Google Calendar and index them into each of the block's Google Sites proved to work very well. And it's something that we plan to do this year as well. So I don't think I can stress enough the benefit services like Google Sites can bring to an online classroom or conference for that matter. It's just so easy to organize notes and media and hyperlinks and in a layout that can be viewed both on a computer screen and smartphone. So going back to Flipgrid, our idea was to replace our poster session that Angus talked about with the recorded videos. The original concept of our poster session was to actively replicate what many MUNs call a white paper, which are usually reports of individual countries that are passed around the meetings. So we had students prepare speeches to record. They gave the same information they would have otherwise shared during a poster session. And in some way, it felt like a step back from where we were initially attempting to pursue. This was an image from a couple years ago, and you can see the active interaction we had mentioned. It's not only participants presenting, but other participants are given passports to take notes of what they learned. And in return, students get a passport seal that represents which presentations they participated in. So you see the little seal right there. That's, they just saw the USA seal presentation. So when that was replaced with this, yeah, it felt like a step back. However, we were pleasantly surprised to see some of the entries from other schools' participants. And I want to show just a little of one that we were especially surprised by. So I'm going to change screens here to our Flipgrid. So hold on a second. Okay. And this actually, hold on a sec there. Okay. So what I'm going to show you is from the delegates of Vietnam who participated in last year's MUN.
Hello, fellow delegates. We are the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Our broad topic is about food waste. Research from 2019 showed that approximately $1 trillion of food waste are produced globally in all nations each year. As we study on pre-ambulatory causes, by 2030, halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chain, including post-harvest losses.
In Vietnam, problem. This is due to a lack of techniques to keep our food longer. And as we stated on our operative clause number 1, we encourage nations to support this idea to help other underdeveloped and developing nations to keep their food longer. Furthermore, cold plasma technology is a method to inactivate the contaminated microbes from meats, fruits, poultry, and from vegetables. By using this technology, we could dramatically decrease the amount of chemicals.
Okay, so this video, of course, was made by participants with a good command of the L2 and a good grasp on how to record and edit video content. Not all videos were done in this manner, But with social distancing an issue, this variation of communication worked for participants at different levels, even for those having to record from home, such as this video I'm going to show you now from delegates of Peru.
Hello, we are the delegates of Peru. Our topic is about food waste. The Peruvian government has adopted many policies to avoid excessive food waste. Food waste is an important issue in Peru. According to Simba, Peruvian restaurants generate between 40 to 500 kilos of waste every day. 75% belong to organic waste, and most of it is from leftover food. This issue is one of the first steps to encourage restaurants to become sustainable and
Okay. So one thing I think that we learned, hold on, let me change back to my, okay. So one thing I think that we learned from what was coming from other schools is that even though the conception of most schools was to record a video speech, much like what is given at the MUN conference, students are still capable of creative and active presentations, even if they are not synchronous events. And even more so, when the student takes control of what and how a video is made, creativity shines, as the first video I presented shows. But at the same time, giving students the option of creation that is most comfortable or convenient for them. This is surely an idea that we plan to bring into this year's conference. What I really would like to emphasize today, however, is the importance of group size in these online learning environments. Going back to our 7-week schedule here, I counted up all the comments and posts students submitted to get an idea from a quantitative perspective on how successful we were at keeping participants engaged. This was determined by the number of comments made in Google Docs and the number of posts submitted to Google Groups during the periods of each individual task listed. And what I'm talking about is on the left side here, you see these numbers. So each number represents each number of posts submitted during these weekly tasks, okay? BM is block meeting, GA is General Assembly. Okay. And one thing that we found was that more engagement between participants occurred during the block meeting tasks than during General Assembly tasks. And also that most engagement occurred in clusters of a few days rather than being spread throughout a whole week. So I think this is important to note because, as I mentioned earlier, the General Assembly has a larger pool of participants than the blocks, and in this case by twofold. So as I mentioned before, General Assembly has about 100 participants. The blocks last year had up to 50. So let me show you what the engagement looked like from a quantitative perspective. We are first looking at data from weeks 1 and 2. This graph represents the number of posts submitted during the block meeting task of discussing submitted operative clauses that are to be considered for the block's draft resolution. The blocks will generate anywhere from 30 to 50 operative clauses from its delegates, but only 15 can be part of the draft resolution. So delegates are using this time to ask questions and respond in support of their submitted ideas. This task was allocated about 2 weeks, which also included the submission of operative clauses that began a few days before discussion started, which is outlined in green that you see here. That's what this green bar line here. You can see that a majority of the posts, more than 50%, as seen in orange here, occurred in the 3 days leading up to a weekend. Even the majority of operative clauses submitted occurred on a single day over up here. The high point here that is off the graph before the discussions opened. In the 3rd week, following a live video meet over the weekend, participants were supposed to continue discussions on operative clauses modified during the video meet. And here as well, most of the discussions are clustered into only 2 days. These first 3 weeks represent the majority of posts and comments submitted by participants. And based on the size of the clusters, we could have concluded these tasks within a week's time, if not less, and probably still obtain the same level of engagement from participants. So after the first 3 weeks, draft resolutions from each block have been submitted to the General Assembly presidents and open to discussion. This graph represents discussion posts that occurred during this General Assembly. Hold on a sec. I'll make sure I'm on the right. Yeah. Okay. So this graph represents discussions posts that occurred during this General Assembly task in week 4. With draft resolutions submitted, other blocks, usually referred to as opposition blocks, can now ask questions and challenge the ideas. With the block who submitted the draft resolution, usually referred to as the proposition block, responding in support of their ideas. As you can see, from a quantitative perspective, the amount of engagement drastically reduced when compared to what took place the previous weeks, with the overwhelming majority of engagement occurring in the final day of this task right here on this Friday. This is despite having a larger pool of participants with all blocks participating now. In week 5, the discussion returned to the blocks to discuss amendments submitted by opposition blocks for the draft resolution. And even though the cluster of posts occurred in one day, the total number of that one day far outnumbers the total number of posts in all General Assembly tasks combined. So by the time we reached our final week, I'm pretty sure participants were ready to call it quits, as is seen in this graph. Not even 10 posts were submitted for this final General Assembly discussion leading up to our final live video meet. So this experience had us come to 2 conclusions. First was about our scheduling. Again, we used a week-by-week linear schedule with the assumption that giving participants roughly a week to complete a task would maximize participation. But the reality was that most tasks could have been completed in shorter periods of time. We could have also overlapped some of the tasks, as was done in the first 2 weeks, with both submission of operative clauses and discussion on them. Second was about group size. Despite the General Assembly having a larger pool of participants, more participation occurred in the small blocks. We have a few theories as to why this might be. First, we feel that block participants had a stronger rapport with each other as they spent more time working with each other prior to the General Assembly tasks. It should also be noted that the General Assembly is mostly a scripted session, so there is more opportunity for participants to speak out in a block meeting. We were also well into the summer break when General Assembly tasks began, and as we all know, nobody likes doing homework during the summer holidays, right? But attempting to research similar situations regarding group size, I came across a study in 1994 from the US in which a group of elementary kids were studied to determine how often girls participated in class. And the conclusion was that boys dominated much of the whole class discussions, which are usually conducted by the teachers. However, when they broke up into smaller groups, girls participated equally among boys. This concluded with the notion that with more control in smaller groups, student participation among boys and girls were equitable. And the study also took note of the equality and participation among the majority white and minority students as well. So in our situation, we can also add the variances in language level among students, taking into account that higher level students participate more. Yet in smaller blocks or even committees, as we found, the lower level students can also engage in participation. This account could also support why we found more engagement during block meeting tasks than General Assembly tasks. This may also account for a huge discrepancy between Flipgrid submissions during block meetings and submissions during the General Assembly. Again, we can also take into account the failure of week-by-week linear schedule, as by the time Flipgrid was being used for submissions as a General Assembly task, it was already summer holiday. So one more time, what did we learn from this experience? First, a week-by-week linear schedule just did not work. We could have consolidated or even overlapped tasks that we think would have resulted in similar, if not more, engagement and participation. For this reason, while we plan on moving online again in 2021, we will keep the conference tasks within our original 3-day schedule. We also learned that smaller group sizes contribute to more participation. So for 2021, we plan to focus a lot more on blocks and smaller committees by increasing the number of blocks to decrease the participant size and focus less on larger General Assembly. Finally, in regards to what we learned from our Flipgrid experience, it is crucial to not only use the L2 effectively, but that they are given the tools and skills necessary to produce rich and actively engaging media, which may also include the teacher just taking a step back and allowing the students to control what and how they record. So that is our presentation. I guess from now we can open this up to questions if anyone has any. Shalana?
All right, we don't have any questions in the chat. So if anyone has a question to ask, please unmute yourself and just jump in and ask your question.
I have a question really quick. So you used Google Sites for a lot of the organization of like the different like committees, blocks, and just the different groups in the Model United Nations. Is that also where you like you published like the links for like Flipgrid and things like that as well? How did the assignment like of groups? How did you assign the groups in general? I'm just a little bit fuzzy on that part in
Okay.
general.
Okay, the latter question first. The groups are actually randomly put together. In the past, we have divided groups based on economic status or similar UN committees. But within the last number of years, they've just been randomly placed. To answer your first question, you're right. So anytime we needed the students to go to a particular website or give them specific instructions, those were on the those were put into the block. And I think I can actually show you what it is. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to see if I can go to a one of the block pages here. So I'm going to show you what. So this is actually what it looked like at the end. So what I was able to do is actually was able to color code some of these as well. So anytime there was an external link to Flipgrid, we kept those in blue. When there was a link to a Google Doc, kept that in purple. I think the green was actually was another Google Doc, but I think the purple was based on the draft resolutions. The green was based on amendments that students were submitting. And then in gray is what we kept the instructions for the students. So try to keep it color coded like that to make it as easy as possible for students to access. And then of course, as I mentioned before, the initial purpose of the Google site was to keep the working draft resolution in an area that all students could access. So from here, they could see the preambulatory clauses, which introduces the problems and the cause of problems. This is a submission form. It's closed right now, of course, but this is where they could submit their operative clauses or their ideas for solutions. Below that is actually an embedded Google worksheet or Google spreadsheet that showed all the submitted operative clauses that every member of this particular block could submit it. And then below that was actually the we embedded Google Groups here. So if students, the nice thing about Google Groups, as I mentioned before, is that students can communicate with each other just through regular email, but we also embedded a messaging system here. So whatever was going through email was also going through this message system here. So if they wanted to look at it as kind of like a chat room, they can do that through here, or they could do it through email. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Because for a while, I taught an elective class at the university to do a model United Nations, and oftentimes I found that like organizing the information between the students was very difficult, even for a small class size. So that's really great.
Yeah, and the Google Sites actually, it's been around for quite a long time. It's actually one of Google's original apps. But maybe 5 years ago or less so, they actually revamped the entire Google Sites. And so if you're familiar with like WordPress or the other like kind of blog making websites, that's what Google Sites looks like now. It's actually extremely easy to just really quickly put together. It's like a copy and paste kind of thing. Any kind of Google document, anything from Google Drive or even YouTube can very easily be embedded into these sites. So it's quite easy to use and very easy to organize as well. And it can be viewed. You don't have to do anything extra to make it look good on a smartphone either, which is great.
It's a WYSIWYG editor. It's pretty simple to use. I just felt in the past that like it was too difficult. I mean, even the most basic things for students to use was too difficult. So I often didn't think I stuck to pen and paper. So that brings, so you guys said that like preparing students to use technology was just as important to as language. Could you expand on that?
Well, if you look at Japan as a society, for those of us who grew up in the US or in Canada or whatnot, when you look at the late 1980s and 1990s, that was very much the PC age for us. In Japan, they didn't have that. They kind of jumped that and went straight into the smartphone. So smartphones kind of became a regular tool in Japan, well, while the rest of the world was engaging in personal computers. And so because of that, a lot of homes did not have computers, and even now still don't. So when you're asking students to make a slideshow, when you're asking students to type out a document or something, many of them do not know how to do that. Even as high school students do not know how to do that because they've never touched a computer. They've never turned on a computer. So when I say we need to teach them how to use the technology, which is just as important as language, it's because of that factor, is that they have very little of any experience using a lot of this technology because of that generation jump. So yeah.
So did you create like introductory videos for them? Did you create PDFs with like step-by-step how to use the applications? Like Flipgrid is a fairly easy application to use, but it has a lot of functionality. And when I was watching those like country presentations earlier, they were pretty advanced. I know none of my students, and they've used Flipgrid a lot, could make a presentation like that using Flipgrid. So
Richard, I can address a little bit of that. I think what I said earlier as well is we had 12 high schools participating, and there was a variety of levels at these high schools, and some were in session and some were operating fully remote. Here at Kyoto Gaidai High School, we were in the classroom, we were working with our students in a face-to-face environment, but also working with them on the technology and everything. The example that Edward showed you from Vietnam is not standard for what was presented by the majority of students. It shows what can be done with creativity and when you just let them go. And there's some students who are able to do that. They're actually better at it than most of the teachers that are trying to teach them how to use these apps on their smartphones and things. One thing I think Edward said earlier is that if we kind of step back and let them have the freedom to put forth a presentation, that it is either standing in front of their closet doors in their bedroom, because that's what they know and that's what they're comfortable with, to putting together a multimedia NHK style video, walking up the steps and talking. That's great when they can do that. We did not, as teachers, necessarily teach them the specifics of putting together a media style presentation. I think we would love to do that if we had the time, but it wasn't part of our curriculum last year. Of course, if students came to us for one-to-one help and some people on staff knew what to do, we would give them advice. Most of the presentations on Flipgrid were pretty much your standard model United Nations style speech, done either from a private space at their home, or they found a quiet space at school for which to record. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have some questions in the chat. First of all, there was a thank you. And the first question is, the pictures that have been shown, there are only Japanese students. However, the videos are of overseas students. My question is this an Model UN an international event? So that's question one.
So regarding that, no, 90% of the students, 99% of the students are from Japanese high schools. And the students that you saw that presented from Vietnam, they go to a Japanese high school as well. Now, one of them was bicultural. I don't know his background. The other was Japanese. command of English was a little higher, it would represent the higher level of the students who participate in this conference. We were by no means trying to say that all the students are at that level. We have a variety of levels. We have some students who have spent a year or longer abroad. We have students who have never been abroad. The point of our conference, and to break it up into different smaller groups and increase interaction, is for lower language learners to be able to participate with higher language speakers together for a common project and for a common cause.
And the second part of that question was, did the school make the emails for the students, or did the students use their own private emails?
From this year's each school is responsible for their own students, how they get into into the apps that we use. At our school, our students were given school administered email accounts, and those are the email accounts that the students use to for engagement. Yes.
Okay, well, that is the end of our time today.